Welcome everybody. This is our first of 8 video webinars on the book, Developing Lean Leaders at All Levels, a Practical Guide. What you'll see, some of you who've got video, in the top right corner, if you open it up, you'll see other video pictures in there. One of them is Brian Miller with his team, and the intent is, welcome Brian, wave your hands. The intent, there he is that his team, he bought 18 books, getting them together on going through the book and implementing Lean in this new, developing leaders way. So thank you, Brian. He's going to have the first question, and everybody else is welcome to chat the questions to LLI Coach or Jeff Liker himself. And what we're doing is the first half hour is the going through the PowerPoint slides, and then we'll open it up for half hour of questions. If it goes a little later and you have to go, don't worry. We're recording it, and it'll be available at leanleadership.guru/community.html, and you can download the video. All right, let's get started. And Jeff, thank you very much for joining us. This is going to be great. I really like the fact that it's a book club, and I think for effective book clubs, somebody's got to take away something and do something with it. Jeff, maybe you could talk about that first, and then we can get started.
Okay, thanks, George. Again, the format for each of these sessions will be to go through one chapter. Today I'll go through chapter 1 and introduce background. The book, Developing Lean Leaders at All Levels, is kind of like the field book to the Toyota Way to Lean Leadership. Just as in the Toyota Way I had a field book. And therefore there's some overlap, but there's also a lot of unique information in the new book, Developing Lean Leaders. And the format of the Toyota Way to Lean Leadership is to tell stories from Toyota. I wrote it with Gary Convis, who was a former managing officer of Toyota, and use those to illustrate concepts. The new book, Developing Lean Leaders format, is to really give you more of a how-to. The examples are from a variety of different companies, not just Toyota, and it's not saying here's what Toyota does and here's the thinking behind it, but rather what should you do if you want to develop yourself and others as a lean leader. So the starting point of the book was to ask ourselves, what are we trying to accomplish? And rather than take a set of quotes from a lean book or a set of quotes from Toyota, I started out with Good to Great from Jim Collins, who studies great companies, primarily American companies. And so they're not Japanese, they don't make cars, they make all sorts of things. They're hotels, it's Disney, it's fast food companies, it's a whole set of different companies. And what characterizes these companies is that they consistently outperform their competitors in their industry. They'll be the best company for 15 years in a row in earnings, or actually he looked at stock prices, and they'll be the outliers. They'll be the one that's way up above the average for their industry. And then he went backwards and said, what are their characteristics? And did a lot of interviews and then assembled a picture, a composite picture that says these are the characteristics of the great leaders. What was interesting to me was that the general characteristics that he described fit Toyota so well. So then I began to think of Toyota as an example of a great company rather than as the great company, the only great company we can learn from. And it also validated a lot of my observations at Toyota by seeing that all great companies seem to have these characteristics. And this is a list, and it's in the book, and you probably read it, but the starting point is passion for delivering value to customers. And this is not the marketing department, but it's the CEO, it's the entire executive team. They see their purpose, and in Toyota's case, they would say, our purpose is adding value to society, communities, and customers. But it starts with the customer. If they can't add value to the customer, then they have lost the game and it's over. Second, they have a set of values for the business. By values, I mean, what do we think is important as we act day to day? And what we value and think important is not simply our profitability in the next quarter. It goes way beyond that. Again, if your mission is to serve society, serve communities, serve customers, there's a lot of things you have to do. You have to be environmentally aware. You have to be concerned about safety. You have to take some responsibility for the economic well-being of a community where you have a plant or an operation and the people who are employees who work for your companies. There's a commitment to building a great enterprise for the long term, and long term is very important, and particularly since we live in a fast world where rapid change often converts into, I better make my money now, this quarter. The idea of a great enterprise is that we want to be exceptional, we want to be the best in our industry, we want to serve our customers better, we want to be the most admired company, and that commitment from the top, the CEO, is a passion for the enterprise, not only a passion for shareholder profits. Many companies, it seems, are really looking at the bottom line, and that's their report card. For the CEO of a great company, his or her report card is this enterprise outstanding, exceptional, performing better than everybody else at what we're supposed to be doing, providing better service, on time, reliably, and are we adapting with new products that customers want, and can we say we're excellent? And and that goes beyond if you're profitable but your customers are not happy and you're damaging your suppliers and you're damaging the communities, you're not a great enterprise. I built on past books with developing lean leaders, including the Toyota Way, which probably most of you are familiar with. And in the Toyota Way, I've started with this model, and it's worth just briefly going through it to remind us. Again, the foundation is long-term thinking, like the great companies that Colin studied. And there's a clear philosophy. And this was represented for the first time in a diagram and on paper in 2001. In fact, they still call it the Toyota Way 2001. And they said, when it comes down to it, there's two things that drive this company and allow us to adapt to the environment and to stay on top or near the top in terms of vehicles sold. And one is continuous improvement. We're constantly trying to get better. We get better, we standardize, we get better, we standardize, we get better, we standardize. And this is happening every place in the world in Toyota. And everybody's being developed to continuously improve. And we do that through the principle of respect for people, where we treat people as partners. And the exchange is that we will provide you with a good standard of living, with stable employment. We'll, as a last resort, after exhausting all other possibilities, lay you off. But we will, during ups and downs, temporary ups and downs, we'll hire temporary labor in order to protect your jobs. And you're going to be the core, you're going to be buffered, and you're going to be your jobs are going to be protected. And part of respect is we're going to challenge you to do your very best. So your part of the bargain is that you're going to help continuously improve your work processes. And you're going to be committed to that and passionate about it and aligned with the company values and company direction in exchange for being a team member who's going to be taken care of by the company and for the long term, probably for the rest of your life. So these are built on, at the bottom, the core values of challenge. And in fact, the view in Toyota is that if a person is not challenged, then they're not being respected. They're being disrespected because they're not growing. They grow through performing Kaizen, through the process of continuous improvement, which develops themselves as they're improving processes, as they're learning how to lead others. Genshi Genbutsu, which we often call Gemba, going to the Gemba, which is really important and I think distinguishes these top leaders in Colin's case and Toyota leaders, is that they're always trying to see for themselves how they're doing. They're not satisfied with a customer survey. They want to go out and talk to customers and see how customers are being served. They're not satisfied with HR deciding on selection criteria and promotions. They want to meet people firsthand, interview them, talk to them, see them at work, watch them change over a machine, watch them holding a daily meeting, watch how they respond when somebody pulls an andon and the line stops. So they want to see for themselves. And then respect means, again, that we're constantly challenging you to grow and develop yourself, even if it doesn't necessarily feel that great at the time. You may feel some pressure, but you're going to come out the end. You'll have the support to come out the end of that pressure stronger, more confident, and a better you. And then teamwork to Toyota means both we want exceptional individuals who are developed to contribute to a team in a common direction. The process of eliminating waste is sometimes misunderstood. And what we're trying to do is to shift the focus of the organization from a vertical focus to making the numbers to a horizontal focus to serving customers. And in the ideal case, we would like to be able to talk to anybody in the company and ask them what they do, and the answer should be, we make cars to satisfy customers, to get them to where they want to go, to keep them safe so they can enjoy the driving experience. We contribute to that. We have a purpose beyond installing the tires, beyond sweeping the floor, beyond maintaining the machines. And in order to continuously improve that process, once you have that process flowing with some degree of stability, then you want to notice when there's deviations from standards that need to be defined. You need to define what is a good process that serves the customer, what's a safe process, what's a process that is low waste, that's low cost. And once a process is defined at some level, then you want to surface problems, and you want leaders focusing on the work itself, not just looking at a report and saying, you didn't make the numbers, you didn't make the Kanban assessment score, you didn't make the number of products you're supposed to make, you didn't make your quality numbers. You want leaders focusing on the work, and what they're going to ask is, why did this get out of standard, and what are you going to do about it? They want people's ingenuity to be used for improving the system and not beating the system. And that requires exceptional people, and it requires some degree of autonomy. So the organization, and this is most clear in manufacturing, but you'll see something similar in other parts of the company, is a structure where, number one, they will often say, let's turn the organization chart upside down, because the value-added workers are most important people. They're the ones that are actually adding value to the customers. So we as leaders need to support them. The team structure in a plant is team members whose job is to do the work and come up with ideas for improving how they do the job and detecting when there's a deviation from the standard. That's the purpose of the andon. I detect a deviation from the standard, I pull a cord and signal we've got a problem, we've got a gap between the standard and actual. The team leader then is the first line of defense they immediately should be there. In two cases, within seconds, they have to be at the team member station trying to understand what the problem is so they can contain it. The group leader is really running their group as though it's a mini business, so that all the equipment in the area, the safety of the people, the development of the people, the daily running of the business, the responding to problems, all of that is overseen by the group leader, but the group leader is also, in a sense, strategically planning through the Hoshin-Conry process I'll talk about in a second, but they have clear goals that are aligned with the goals of the managers and the vice presidents, and they're responsible for delivering on those goals, those annual goals, and doing something every day to move toward those goals. And then there's the assistant manager, and it goes all the way up to the vice president and president. But the work groups are important because they're not self-managing. They're not left alone by management. They have a very, very strong leadership in the group leaders and team leaders, but the group leaders and team leaders are lean leaders. They're at the gemba. They're asking questions. They're not blaming people. They're encouraging problems to be surfaced. When the problems are surfaced, they're objective facts. They're not a cause to point the finger at somebody. And then the dynamic of the Toyota Way I called problem solving, or you could call it continuous improvement. And the key to problem solving is to have a process for solving the problem. And that process is plan, do, check, act. We called it in the Toyota Way to continuous improvement, plan, do, check, adjust, because what you're doing is you're establishing a plan, which actually is like an experiment. It's a hypothesis. That is, we have a direction, a vision, we have a challenge, we identify gaps between the current state and where we want to go. We know where we are in relation to where we want to be, and then we formulate countermeasures, which are like hypotheses. I believe if I improve this, that I will get closer to true north, to the vision we have. I believe that, but I don't know yet until I do it, until I run the experiment. And when I run the experiment, I'm going to communicate, I'm going to involve, I'm going to have a team of people who also understand the vision and the experiment, and they're going to help me also to check what happened as a result of that experiment, and then based on the results of the experiment, I'm going to take action. And that's usually called ACT. We said adjust because sometimes ACT is interpreted as we simply standardize what we've done, whereas adjust means we're now going to go through start the next experiment, and now continue to adjust the process to get closer and closer to my target. So this is what every lean leader should be expert at doing. Very few leaders that I run across in the world are very good at doing that. What they do is more like the next figure.
Video.
Okay, so that we talk about firefighting, and what we mean by that is that the leaders, that there's so many problems and there's so much chaos happening and the standards are not well defined and we don't have a clear direction. So every time there's a little brush fire any place, the leaders run to contribute, even whether they can contribute or not. And they're constantly in a reactive mode of reacting to the problem of the minute. In that case, when you're doing that, you don't have time to plan. You don't have time to check to see what happened. You don't have time to learn and adjust. You kill the plan, do, check, act cycle. And it becomes do, firefight, firefight, firefight. So I would say a good definition for lean is a strategy for operational excellence toward the mission of the company, toward the strategy of the company in the way that Jim Collins would talk about it, based on clearly defined values that engage people in continuously improving safety, morale, quality, cost, and productivity. And quality is from the customer's point of view. And that's a very broad definition as compared to a definition that says something like lean is eliminating waste. which gives you a picture of just taking away people and becoming more efficient rather than moving the whole organization forward toward excellence. In the total way to continuous improvement, Jim France and I came up with a general model that shows how the lean system should be operating ideally, and we began by building the model frame by frame. And first, we're starting with the current situation that exists in most organizations, which is that processes are isolated. We call them chimneys sometimes, and they're protected by inventory. The inventory could be a time buffer. The inventory could be a physical buffer of products, and I don't have to necessarily worry in the next hour about my customer, my direct customer. I need to do work, and perhaps once a week I can check how I'm doing, or I might wait till I get negative feedback. But in a lean system, you connect processes. Next slide. And, well, so this is just showing that there's many disconnected processes. And again, disconnected means if I'm connected to you, what I do in a short period of time, if I write code, you check the code, or you use the code as part of your part of the computer program. And we have small batches that are moving between people. When we have small batches of information or material moving between people, then what happens is that it becomes immediately apparent if there's a problem. If I am late, if what I produce is poor quality and doesn't work for you, I'm going to get feedback quickly based on small batches. If I'm working in my office and I have a deliverable by the end of the month, then I have a whole month before I'm going to figure out that I'm on the wrong track. So disconnected processes are kind of the enemy of lean, and that's why inventory is so focused on in manufacturing, because it buffers operations to the point where I lose sight of the customer. Next slide. So what we want to do is connect processes, and if we have buffers, which are almost always necessary, even if it's one part, we want those buffers to serve a purpose. That is, I don't want to be connected to you to the point where every time I stop, you have to stop, and everybody has to stop. So I need small buffers, particularly if I'm not operating in the same cycle time that you are. And what I want is those buffers to be as small as possible, and the more stable my process, the more predictable my output, the smaller that buffer has to be. The less variability in my process, the smaller I can make that buffer, and the more I could give you just in time what you need. Next slide. So we build this up, and as we get leaner, as we have a closer connection between steps in the process, then problems become apparent. As the slide says, the system itself demands improvement because we're going to shut down, and that's the purpose. The andon is to actually have pain. You shut down the line when there's a problem. You have very little inventory, so the welding process is welding, and cars are going directly to paint. And if I stop welding, the paint department might shut down in 15 minutes or half an hour. And therefore, there's pain if I either make an error in welding or the robot breaks down. So I need to continually work to address every problem that occurs because there's an impact, a visible impact, or I'm getting feedback from the next person who I'm serving if it's a knowledge work process. So the tighter the steps are linked, the more quickly problems surface. Now, if you're not stable, if you have too much variability and you link processes too much, for example, you have too little inventory, you're going to have problems all the time, you're going to be shut down all the time, and then you can't in any way respond to the problems or even prioritize. So you need a larger buffer when you're unstable, and then as you get better and better, you shrink and shrink that buffer to get more closely connected to the customer. And then you need a way to prioritize, because there always are going to be deviations, and always are going to be problems. And so you need some system that assigns priority and asks, what are we going to work on today? What are we going to push off till tomorrow? And then those priority items then get queued up and you begin the process of improvement on the high priority items. And the people are the ones doing that, and the daily management system is really to take a look and reflect. How did we do yesterday? What did we work on last night, perhaps, when the manager stayed over late with the team leaders and group leaders? And where are we now today? What do we expect to happen today? And every day you reflect on the last day and you plan this day. So you're doing pdca every day. And you want to visually show your status of how I did compared to how I expected to do. What can we improve today? To get to the point where you have this way of acting and thinking, of focusing on the customer, understanding what they want, knowing what the most important standards are, identifying problems, prioritizing those problems, working on them with people at the Gemba, empowering people in the teams, all these things that don't seem to come natural to most people, you need to practice. Just like learning a violin or a sport or cooking, you need to practice and you need feedback because we can't always see ourselves how we're doing. So we talk about leaders as coaches. The best person to be your coach is the person who's already supposed to be there with you, which is your boss, and your boss has a boss. And we can't expect staff experts on lean to be everywhere at once. There's usually a ratio of, say, 1 to 500 or 1,000 in a large company, or maybe 1 to 50. But there's just too many people to coach to expect our lean coaches to do it unless we have enormous lean coaching departments. So better to have the actual management hierarchy acting as the coaches, but they need the skill to do that. They need the skill to go to the Gemba, to see, to prioritize, to solve the problems so that they can teach that skill to the people who who are reporting to them, who are actually learning from them. And to add anything that we start to get into the habit of doing that takes a high level of discipline, a high level of effort, is going to tend to degrade over time. Our bodies degrade over time unless we exercise, unless we work out, unless we consciously watch what we eat. And that takes effort. There's always temptation to eat that sweet, to skip today's workout. And there's temptation to skip the walk to the shop floor. And you've got a bunch of work to do on your computer. You've got a bunch of meetings. So this business of lean leadership is a never-ending battle. The framework for the book, which was developed in the Total Way to Lean Leadership, is this 4-step model. And conceptually, it's quite simple. If you're going to be a leader, you have to be in control of yourself. You have to be driven internally, not by rewards and punishments and how others are checking you. So the first step is you have to commit to developing yourself to live the true north values, and recognizing that it requires repeated learning cycles over and over again, practicing these values, practicing this method of continuous improvement with a coach. So in Toyota's case, they select people not always because of technical ability, but more often because of openness to learning and learning ability. And they don't want to have to monitor people, particularly leaders. They want to pick the people to be leaders, and they usually pick the leaders from the workers, from the engineers, from the people who they can observe over a period of time inside the company. They pick those people that have the self-drive and want to develop themselves. Once you develop yourself to a certain point where you know some things that the people who report to you don't know, then you can start teaching those people. And your role can change from a hall monitor to a coach and teacher. And at that point, you need to look beyond yourself and be able to really grasp the situation from the point of view of other people, see the world through their eyes, see what their potential is, even better than they do, and figure out how to help them step by step achieve their potential. When you have developed work groups with group leaders, team leaders, the team leader ratio, by the way, that Twitter considers ideal is about 5 to 8, and that's because the team leader is a coach and doing daily coaching, and they can only handle about that number of people if they're in a coaching role. And if you have group leaders and a good ratio of team leader coaches to people, then those teams become not self-managing, but relatively self-sufficient. And they can then they can do daily Kaizen, and then your job is to support them. And you'll do that more often by challenging them and asking questions and guiding them rather than telling them things. And you don't want to take over and do it for them. Just like if I'm a violin teacher, I don't want to take the violin away from a student and say, no, do it this way. The student can't learn just by watching me. The student has to do it themselves. And then finally, when you have this capability of all these people who are seeing problems and they can solve problems effectively using a strong process of improvement, now you want to align all that energy and toward common goals that are the challenging business goals that you know about because you're monitoring the environment and because you understand the bigger picture of the positioning of the company in the world compared to your competitors with changing customer needs. And that process is Hoshin Kanri, which starts with a strategy, starts with understanding the environment, starts with setting goals for the company that are measurable, and then starting to break those goals down, working with people at every level to redefine the goals in terms that make sense for their process. What should sales be doing to support the vision? What should supply chain be doing to support the vision? What should human resources be doing? That's not apparent until you go through the thinking process of converting what the company needs as a whole to what each of those groups need to do to support that business plan so that it all adds up to the business plan. And that's a lengthy process called catchball. There's a lot of dialogue and give and take. In turn, it takes 3 months to develop the plan for the year, for the next year. And by that time, everybody has a set of objectives and an initial plan for approaching those objectives. And then they start the year and they go through a lot of pdca loops. And while they're doing that, including the planning process of setting objectives, the leaders are developing themselves, they're coaching and developing others. So the cycle is continually going on and strengthening. So with that, that's a summary of the foundation of the book. And then we have a few chapters on generic tools that every lean leader needs to master. One is is mastering visual management as it relates to identifying problems. And then the next chapter is, once you identify the problems, how do you solve the problems? And we talk about various methods like A3. We talk about the improvement kata, the work that Mike Rother's done. And then we launch into a chapter about self-development, one about coaching others, one about daily Kaizen, and one about Hoshin Kanri. And then we give some examples of putting this all together.
All right, Jeff, thank you very much. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Brian to come to the table and start rifling off some questions. And let's see if this works good, Brian. Brian, are you ready? Now, I could take you off mute, or you could do that, but after you ask the question, put yourself back on mute.
All right.
I got Brian. I took him off mute. Go ahead, Brian.
All right. Who has the question? Who might have the question? Ben? Yeah.
Can you hear me from back here?
A little bit. If you could talk loudly, it would help.
Is that better?
Yeah. That's
Okay.
better.
My name is Sandy, and my question is, can PDCA teams be done from different locations? And the reason why I ask is I'm a warehouse controller located here with Brian's Group in Conyers, Georgia. And I'm actually responsible for two of the warehouses. We have one in Florida and one about 3.5 hours away. So I didn't know how a PDCA team could work in that essence.
Okay, so first of all, the vision I gave you was, Toyota calls it True North, which is a direction. It's the direction you want to go, but that doesn't mean you can implement it like you can implement a software program. It means you have to work your way deliberately over time toward that direction. So I show the leadership model that we're moving through stages to support daily Kaizen. And once you have daily Kaizen, so let's just start with step one, self-development. If you're running two warehouses and they're 3.5 hours apart, you need to be very well developed. So you need to be really good when you visit the warehouse at being able happening and seeing gaps with that vision, both gaps in the physical, technical process of operating the warehouse and gaps in the people and the leaders. And then you need to have a way of focusing on the most critical issues and challenges that warehouse, not both warehouses, but each warehouse individually faces. And then you need a way to prioritize those problems and then be working with the leadership of that warehouse to be sure that they're focusing on improving what you agree with them needs to be improved. What's the priority for this year, say, and what's the priority for this month, and what's the priority for this week. And you want to check if they're actually doing a good job of following a PDCA process. And at first, you have to have the skill to know if they're doing well and to guide them and to coach them. If you're coaching them, then if you've learned enough to coach them effectively, you're now at stage 2. So now you want to develop your plant manager and perhaps the assistant managers, and that will be a major focus. Perhaps you also have an engineer in the plant who's responsible for improvement, and you're coaching that person as well. And part of the coaching is you walk to the floor, you walk through the plant with that person, and you're asking questions, and you're challenging them, and you're seeing if they have their finger on the pulse, if they really know where they're going, if they know how they're doing compared to where they're going, if they have a good way of moving the warehouse forward toward those improvement goals. And then at some point, if they're developed enough and they're developing, say, the supervisors, then the supervisors can begin leading daily Kaizen. At that point, you're checking whether you're checking all the levels. So in Toyota's case, they will say, we're checking the process. And what they mean by that is are people continuously improving? Are they working on the right problems? Are they improving and raising the level? Are they leading correctly the work groups? So do the work groups have the autonomy they need? So they're checking processes that are already in place by stage 3, and they're just checking for deviations so they can give some advice. Why don't you try working on this? I see that you have a metric board, but there's a lot of extra metrics that I don't see you're working on. Maybe you should simplify the board. So making very specific suggestions, because at that point, the organization is fairly mature. So in other words, what you'll do for the two warehouses when you start out this journey will be different from what you do when the organization is fairly mature and they're capable in the warehouse of improving toward goals that you set with them. And at that point, you're checking and you're fine-tuning. And also you're then in the Hoshinkanri stage where you can now set goals with the warehouse manager, with the confidence that the warehouse manager knows how to translate those into operational goals, knows how to lead daily improvement. And so it depends on where you are in the cycle. In the early stages, you have to spend more time in the warehouse, or you have to spend, if you're not even really expert at plan, do, check, act, at structured problem solving, at understanding basic tools like visual management, standard work, you have to learn those things because before you can teach others. So you have to actually do projects, maybe have a coach yourself and develop yourself. So it depends on where you are in this model, what you're going to be working on. The more evolved your organization is, the more evolved you are, the easier it is to handle multiple warehouses.
Thank you, Jeff. Brian, you may have more questions. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Dan Bateman, and I just had a question of what's the number one largest difficulty people have to start the transition to lean?
It's hard to say number one, but what we seem to have the most difficulty in the companies we coach is getting leaders, and it's more difficult the higher up you go in the organization, but getting leaders to really be and live at the Gemba, that seems to be the most difficult thing. We get agreement by senior leaders in everything I talked about, what they want to accomplish. They want continuous improvement. They want a strong culture. They want to be customer focused. And then if we're coaching them, and let's say I have somebody who's there every week or maybe 1 week a month, when that person is there, they go to the Gemba and they can't find any of the leaders. And then they ask the leader, they contact the leader and say, can we meet at the Gemba? And the leader's got 10 other things that are more important. So prioritizing Gemba time so that, say, I mean, a good lean leader is probably spending, say, half your time at the Gemba. And if you're not there, you don't really know what's going on, and you can't really effectively lead. And that's a problem. So we would get, say, work with supervisors, engineers assigned to improve. They're gung-ho, they're all excited, but they keep on running into barriers. And they could be policy barriers, they could be bad standards, they could be bad standard operating procedures, it could be a department that's getting in their way. They run into barriers, but there's no one to really break down the barriers who actually understands the problem because the leaders are not at the Gemba.
All right, while Brian gets more questions ready, I've got one from Bruce. Bruce is asking, he's asking for your thoughts on measuring efficiency. I find it to be misleading and a metric to drive engagement in a robust, lean manufacturing environment. So again, what are your thoughts on measuring efficiency?
Well, as I mentioned, the goals of Toyota are cost, quality, delivery, safety, morale, and they want a balanced look at all those things. So what is efficiency? It is probably related to cost. So if there's a obsession with efficiency, then you're measuring one way. It's one view on cost. It's if a person produces more, or if I get more output for fewer people, then I'm efficient. That's often the view. It's labor productivity of an individual. Now that may or may not reduce your cost in the short term, but in long term, there's many opportunities for cost reduction besides making a person work faster. And in fact, the fundamental waste in lean is overproduction. So often when we measure individual efficiency, what people do is they produce a lot of quantity of something that's not needed, and they overproduce. So you really want the system to be flowing to the customer with perfect quality, with machines that are well maintained. You want the system to be functioning at a high level of efficiency, of quality, of productivity, and that is different from individuals just working their hardest and making the most widgets.
Thanks, Jeff. One more from an auditor. How can I convince top management that long-term thinking and empowerment will drive better profit than the opposite. And the name is Miriam.
Well, first of all, as an auditor, you have a big advantage in that you actually, your business is measuring things and collecting data, and a lot of people don't have that skill. One of the things I've noticed is that when a plant embarks on lean, they often start in an area of the company. It could be one product line in one factory. It could be a whole factory, but there's some area where they are doing well. And that area is usually led by somebody who is a level 5 leader in Collins terms, or lean leader in my terms. And even though they're outperforming others, it's not noticed by top management because they're just a small part of the company. And top management also doesn't realize the reason this department or this product line is outperforming the rest is because of all the investments they're making in developing people, which are long-term investments. And the manager of that area is often protecting their people from senior management and sort of creating an island where they're creating a lean culture despite the rest of the company not being lean. If, as an auditor, you can find those gems and demonstrate this part of the organization is outperforming other parts because of these investments they're making that are long-term, that could be a very valuable role because top management typically cannot see it. They see aggregated numbers and they don't really understand what lies beneath them.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Brian's group. I know Brian just kind of left the building. Steve Dokas. Steve, do you have any questions from people sending them your way?
Yes, I do. Actually, I have a lot of them. When an organization starts the lean journey, what should be the first step? Problem solving or Hoshikanai?
Okay. I just had a discussion with Dave Meyer, one of my co-authors, and he said that whenever he asked, when he worked for Toyota, whenever he asked his sensei, his mentor, almost any question like that, what is the best way? He knew what the answer was. It was 100% of the time, it depends. There was never, they would never give him one best way. And the one best way idea comes from Frederick Taylor in scientific management and a deterministic thinking process. So there's no one best way. You have to understand the situation of that organization or that part of the organization. In general, Hoshikanai assumes that as I cascade goals down through the organization and I play catch ball with somebody, they're skilled at catching the ball. There's no point in throwing the ball at somebody who doesn't know how to catch and it hits them in the head and gives them a concussion. So they have to have the skill. And the skill they have to have is the problem-solving process. And therefore, in that sense, I would say they have to become strong at turning that goal into action that through PDCA will get them closer to the target before you can start firing targets at them that are meaningful. And if there's one part of the organization that's gotten that skill, but most of the organization doesn't have it, then Hoshikanai becomes really management by objectives. It becomes top-down, give me this or else, and then becomes a checklist game. So the reason we put Hoshikanai fourth is because there's some level of skill needed in how to improve in steps 1 through 3 before you can get to the point of completely aligning the organization effectively using Hoshikanai.
All right, Brian, do you have any more questions?
Yeah, George, I had one, and Dr. Laker. I think we're probably in the initial stages. As a matter of fact, I know we are. So what are is there a quick way or a quicker way, or what's the best way to commit to the self-development?
Well, first of all, everybody needs a coach. Now, your goal should be to become a coach. And all of us are always in the self-development stage, and we're always in the coaching stage. We should be doing all these things at whatever level of maturity we're at. So, but whatever level we're at, we should always be trying to improve ourselves, Kaizen ourselves. But if you have spent most of your career in a traditional organization that's running by the numbers, and you're more managers than leaders, and you're not at the Gemba, and you're not sort of trained in how to develop standards that are effective and engage people, you have to learn that. So you need a coach from somewhere, whether it's inside the company or hiring somebody from outside. And there's different coaches with different philosophies. For example, I mentioned Mike Rother, and I'll talk about this more in the problem-solving chapter, but I talked about the improvement kata and the coaching kata, which are very defined, structured methods for learning how to improve by doing something every day and having very clear structure and practice routines, very clear things to practice, and then the coach having a very clear structure for guiding your practice. So that's very, very highly structured and developed. And then you have something like A3 teaching that John Shook writes about in Managing to Learn, which is the way you develop, say, a 3-month improvement project, and you have a coach, and they're checking every step of the process. Did you define the problem right? Do you understand the root cause? Do you understand the gaps, even before the root cause? Do you understand the most important gaps that you intend to work on? And you have to explicitly define every step before you can go to the next step. And again, you need a coach to judge whether you're on track or not, whether you're following a good process or not, whether you have involved the right people effectively, whether you've engaged people correctly. So without a coach, it's very difficult to self-develop. And self-develop doesn't mean like a self-help guide, like I get the book on how to finish my basement, or I get the book on how to cook a fine meal, and without anybody teaching me, I just figure it out for myself. It doesn't mean you have to figure it out for yourself. You do need a coach of some sort, and then you need to practice. And I find that when we've worked with companies and they say, I've read your books, Dr. Leiker, it's really how we modeled our company, and then we begin working with them, there's huge gaps between their intellectual understanding and what they have the skill to do in practice. And the only way to close that gap is through practice, like anything else. Practice with a coach.
Jeff, thank you. When somebody throws in a question twice, I got to ask it, and then I'll go back to Steve. So this is Thanasi Kanalakis. I think he's Greek, Jeff. So for a company that is new to lean, yeah, one of us. For a company that is new to lean and not yet committed to it, what short-term negatives need to be addressed up front in setting expectations in the business case?
Personally, I take the same perspective as John Shook and Mike Rother, where your first real goal is to begin to develop the leadership. Now, the way the Toyota folks do that is always through a first project. They pick something in the company to improve, and they sometimes call it a model line or model product family. So they pick something to work on, and they go through the whole problem-solving process. Okay, what's our vision? Why we have that vision? What is the current situation? Do we really understand it? What are the gaps? What are we going to focus first on for improving? How can we run experiments and try and test out our ideas and start the PDCA cycles? So they will do that. In the Toyota case, they won't use the language of Mike Rother, of Toyota Kata. They won't even teach A3. They'll just go to the Gemba and just start working. But they don't want to work on an end-to-end value stream. They don't want to work on business objectives of the company. They want to pick the machining process or the assembly process or the sales process or the process of making a bid with a customer. They want to pick a defined process and they want to lead a team through that with the senior management supporting it and at least watching closely and being closely involved, if not leading it. And they want to also develop some internal coaches. So they'll have some people who are going to become the lean coaches who are part of that initial project. So this first project is strictly for learning's sake. Then when you have some people who now have some understanding, then we can expand to another project or another value stream or another department. And that all happens usually over about the first year or so of just being very focused in small areas for the sake of learning, like a study group. Then you can sit back and say, what have we learned? How much time does it take to develop this capability in people so that we have something sustainable? And how many coaches do we have? And where do we want to go next? And what is our capacity for spreading this? So you can have an educated discussion about the next plan for the next plan, big plan to check X cycle. The problem is when you're starting out, you don't know enough. You haven't tested enough. You haven't tried enough to know how far you can go. And then you get into the trap of what I call 1 inch deep and a mile wide, which is we sprinkle lean dust every place, and we end up with pretty pictures and value stream maps and 5S. And at some point, I'd done work with Ford. One of the first big projects was the Ford production system. And then we discovered that the shop floor workers actually thought FPS stood for fresh paint smell. Because that's what they associated. We're painting everything, colors. And that's lean. So you have to start in a focused area developing some capability first.
Now, the follow-on question here by Tom is, do you see a hit to the short-term profitability of companies just beginning lean?
Again, if you take the approach that I'm talking about, where you start in focused areas, there's no reason why it should affect your profitability. The bad news is that I can do a fabulous job in this one area, and it may not affect the profitability positively because it's too small a part of the company. The good news is that if I do something bad, it's not going to damage the profitability because it's also not big enough. So if I were to have a massive lean effort in year one, where I'm trying to change everything at once, and I'm giving all new targets and all new marching orders for how to behave, and I totally disrupt the company, then I could harm profitability. But if I'm focusing on a certain area, and if I do this right, the good news is that our experience is a really good plan, do, check, act process with really clear targets and people who are being well coached will, in almost 100% of the cases, achieve the objective. So we almost could be guaranteed, if we do this right, that we're going to improve whatever we're working on, and that part of the business will contribute more to profitability. So there really should not be a hit to profitability, but you may not get a big improvement in profitability for the first year or two.
All right, thank you. For everybody that has to go, we understand, but we're going to stay behind. I think, Jeff, you're going to take a few more questions, aren't you?
Yep.
Okay, good. Steve, get ready. And for those that have to leave, you can get a video recording of this in the online office. I'll send you an email later. Brian seems to have a question. I'll take him off, so we'll bypass Steve here. Brian, go ahead.
No, actually, we're gonna go ahead and log off and have a discussion here.
Yeah, good job, Brian. Thank you very much for everything.
Thank you, George. We appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Okay, see you next month.
All right, Steve, go ahead.
George, I have about probably 10 to 15 questions that have come over on question and answer. So I don't know if you're going to have enough time to answer all of them. So how do we go about answering these questions?
Yeah, what we do is, let Jeff answer whatever he's able to say I'm comfortable with. And then ultimately, Jeff will say, I got to go. And then we'll field the rest of the questions ourselves. If we need Jeff's help, we'll ask for it.
So any way you can prioritize or group together questions that are related would help.
Let's see. There's a lot of, for our information, George, there was a lot of I can't hear you to begin with through the process, probably about a dozen people. So they want to know where they can get a hold of the video later on.
That's an easy one. George, why don't you tell them that?
Yep. How does lean work
I'll send them an email, Jeff.
Okay.
How does models like Baldridge and EFQM?
I'm tempted to say it doesn't, but that's a little bit of an oversimplification. I will give one example of a hospital where I happen to know an excellent lean leader who runs a part of the hospital, and he actually took on doing continuous improvement, leading continuous improvement, developing himself for his part of the hospital. He was the vice president part, without support from the rest of the hospital. The rest of the hospital had a very mechanistic view of improvement. It was mostly driven out of the quality department, and they were basically making rules and saying, follow my rules. And he was engaging, empowering people, continuously improving, creating flow, reducing time to serve the customer. He was doing fabulously. They applied for the Baldridge Award, and even though he kind of felt alienated, like the rest of the hospital doesn't support what he's doing, they held his group up as the best example. And mainly because of his efforts, the hospital won the Baldridge Award. Now, his view when they were being examined by the Baldridge examiners was that the worst thing that can happen to our hospital is we win the Baldridge Award, because we're not ready and we don't deserve it. But his fear was that the Baldridge examiners wouldn't be able to see deep enough into the organization to see the difference between the official report and the reality. They wouldn't be at the gamba enough. And he was right. The hospital won the Baldridge Award. They then could relax, and then they stopped improving. So in that sense, for them, it was something negative. And I know that there's organizations that have really worked hard to improve using the Baldridge criteria. And their view was that winning the Baldridge Award was just one step on their journey, and they just kept on improving beyond that. So it's a good model, and a learning organization that's very healthy can use it effectively, but an organization that's sort of stuck as a not learning bureaucracy will use it just as a way to advertise how good they are, and they'll fool themselves in thinking that they're better than they are. And my experience is that these examiners can't get deep enough into the organization to see the reality.
Okay, next question. This will be a good one for you, Jeff. How do you sustain momentum with lean?
I think the problem with that question often is that we're thinking about it at too high a level. We coach for a 5,000 person company, and I'm going around doing projects, and I would like whatever we come up with in the time I'm there to just sustain itself and keep growing even when I'm not there. And that's not very realistic. What we want to, the question should be, how do we teach leaders, how do we develop leaders to the point that they can improve and sustain improvement within their area of responsibility? And that's a result of developing the leaders. A well-developed leader can do that. But generally, when things are not sustaining, the leaders are not well developed, and they're doing what some expert is telling them to do. They're following some company program, and they're doing it in a checklist sort of way, without really understanding the purpose, without being passionate about the purpose, without having the energy to really drive it and lead it, or they don't have leadership skills, and nobody's really coaching them.
Okay, this might be a follow-on. How do you respond to feedback from leaders who view some of this as micromanaging people?
Well, another thing that I've observed is that if I have 100 leaders reporting up to me, or if I have 10 leaders reporting up to me, let's say 10, and I'm trying to now develop these 10 leaders toward this image I now have of what they should be doing, and I believe that I need to be with them to coach them, and 2 of the 10 leaders feel like I'm micromanaging them, then I feel like a failure, and I'm concerned about that. It bothers me, and I'm obsessed about those 2 leaders. What I should be is I should be focusing on the 8 leaders who want to be coached, or I should ask myself, am I doing a good job coaching? Maybe I am micromanaging. Because to me, the difference between coaching and micromanaging is that if I'm there at the Gemba and I help you to better do your job, I help you to learn, I empower you, I break down some barriers that you have because you don't have the authority I have, then generally you're going to see me as somebody you want to have around. But if I'm just asking you a bunch of questions and checking up on you and I don't have a lot to offer because I haven't developed my skills enough, then it appears that I'm micromanaging. So it could be the coaching style, or it could be that when you're early on in this process, even if you're a great coach, there's some people who will realize that they're benefiting from your coaching, and there's other people who won't. What I would do is focus on the people who want to self-develop and see the value in your coaching so that they can start to become role models for those who are resisting. And then you'll get peer pressure as well. So you think about this long term, you don't need 10 people to all be on board in lockstep. Even if 1 or 2 people are strong, work with those people, then work with the next 2 people, then the next 2 people, and continue to talk to the people resisting, not forcing them into anything, but just to get to know them and build a relationship.
Okay, how do you feel about the measurement aspect of Six Sigma as compared to the PDCA cycle?
I think that Six Sigma, good Six Sigma, is the PDCA cycle. So if you look at DMAIC, the first 3 steps are plan, and then you implement something, you do something, and then what is called control should really be check and act. Now, if I've seen people that learn Six Sigma in some sort of course, or maybe from Master Black Belt, but they learn Six Sigma in a way where the most important work they do is the define, measure, analyze. And they feel that if we define, measure, analyze to the nth detail with the right statistical distribution with perfectly accurate data, then we will know what to fix. And then we'll implement it relatively quickly, and then we just control what we've implemented. And they don't see it really as a learning process. Now, if you take, say, Mike Rother's improvement kata, it's exactly the opposite, where there's some you plan, but most of the planning is observing at the Gemba what's really happening. It's identifying your next target condition for the next 2 weeks. You PDCA your way to that, then you develop your next target condition, then you PDCA your way to that. So you're learning step by step, iteratively toward a target. And you're not assuming that you can solve all the problems in the first 3 stages. So my feeling is that that often there's too much emphasis on analysis of data in Six Sigma and not enough analysis of experimenting at the Gemba, reflecting people in that department. Now, for some very technical problems, like we need to set up the chemical process and get exactly the right balance of chemicals and make sure that the machines are capable and there's interactions between different variables, then for that, you're basically doing an engineering project, and following, doing a lot of analysis may well be what's most important. But for the most of the problems we solve most of the improvements we make in how we do our work. I think I would like to see more emphasis on experimenting at the gamble with the people and less emphasis on upfront measurement and analysis.
Okay. A problem can be a threat to customer satisfaction. In my company, it often leads to firefighting. What is the key to restore the pdca cycle?
Well, as I showed that model of problems surfacing, because they surface all the time, and then you need a way of prioritizing and then going through pdca. Now, what I didn't say, and I think what sometimes is taken for granted by people who work for Toyota or study Toyota system, is the role of containment. That when you first have a quality problem that might get through to your customer, your first priority is contain the problem. Don't allow it to get through the system all the way to the customer. Or if it's not the customer, take immediate action to recover. And that means might mean going to the customer and fixing the problem or giving them a replacement or something. But you have to take some immediate action to contain the problem. And then once it's contained, then you have to decide, is this what I'm going to spend my time? How much time and effort will I spend on solving this problem at the root cause? Because I've got 300 other problems. So you have to have a way of prioritizing. But you never just ignore a safety or quality problem. You have to contain, and containment is really a type of firefighting. It's temporary until I have the time to go back and really do root cause analysis and solve the problem.
Thanks, Jeff. Steve, we can't hear you.
I think, yeah, I was just looking through the questions. I think that's probably basically it, Jeff. I think you've answered it through the additional information you gave to the previous questions.
Great, thanks. And also, this is just the first week, and we're going to have a whole chapter on problem solving and visual management. So all these issues are going to be discussed in detail when we reach that chapter. Appreciate your time and participation, and hope this is worthwhile, and hope we can, as many of you will stay with me and with us through the whole book. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Take care, and I'll field any last questions and send everybody an email. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Take care, George.
Okay.